This clay is a little stiff, but it's actually kind of good for throwing a platter.
What kind of clay you got there?
I think this is Zella.
Okay. You like it stiff a little.
I usually throw with it a little softer than this, but it holds itself up better if it's a little stiff. You just got to power through the centering a little harder. And typically when I make a platter of this size, it's a 2-day throwing process. And I'll explain that as we get to it, but I've gotten pretty good at getting these done in one go for a demo. So I center with kind of like a more manhandling technique.
He's manly. That's what he's saying.
I think that there's like more finesse to it than I do, but I just like lean into it. Put a lot of weight into it, so. The taller the form, the more times I cone it. For this, I just kind of cone it enough times until it doesn't feel so lumpy that it throws me.
Do you make a lot of platters?
I make a lot of platters. I usually do like a platter day, and it does wear me out, but I'll make maybe like between 6 and 8, and I usually start with a 25-pound one, and then depending on how it came out, I might make another one, and then go down and do a couple 18-pound ones, and then a couple 12-pound ones. And then I have, then I don't make them for the next cycle because I can only really fit a couple in each firing. And so I'll throw them in the morning, and then if it's dry enough at the end of the day, I'll put them back on the wheel and kind of re-throw the rim and do my slip thing. But for today's purpose, I'm gonna throw it and slip it all in one go, and hopefully it'll work out. So once I get it to about here, kind of want to use my fist here and make a little indention. And it's just like centering with your thumb, except I'm using my knuckle. And then once I get it flattened, you gotta watch out for this little thing, because it'll actually separate from your pancake. So I just pay attention to it and push it back in as it needs to. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically use my arm like a big bat. And so I'm gonna flatten this whole thing down using like this whole section of my arm. And I throw wet, and I like to keep a sponge in my hand so I can just keep watering it as it goes.
Damn, you are manly.
Yeah.
That's hurting my back.
Well, it's pretty stiff clay. So then once you get it like this, I'm always watching this part because I don't want to get the fold over on the foot when you flip this thing over, and then you see those little creases if you've ever made a plate like that. That's why I'm always pushing this exterior back in. But once it's this flat, then I can go back in the center and just drag my fist towards myself. Little air bubble there. If I ever throw anything more than 5 pounds, I always check. It's too much effort to center anything and not check and see my depth. On a platter, I like to go about 1 inch, so I can go a little bit more here. You're gonna trim, 20% of this thing off at the end. And the last thing I want it to do is sag when I'm trimming it. So I leave myself plenty of base there, and I like to have a big defined foot on there, so I want plenty. I'm also letting up a little as I get near the rim, because I like a platter to be more like a bowl, where it's one continuous gentle curve rather than a flat plane with sides. That's just my personal aesthetic preference, and so that's what I try to achieve. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and start working on that curve and making sure I've got plenty of compression with the rib. And now I want to just lift up this rim, so I'm just digging my fingers underneath right against the bat and just creating this little space right here, or here if you can see that. This is where you can get a little ambitious, so you want to take it slow here. If you go too far, then you start to throw this thing out and you end up with maybe a big platter, but most likely a big platter that goes like that and falls down, and you have a little tiny foot down there. So if you want to make a bigger platter than this, you just need to start with a larger amount of clay. I'm sort of starting to pinch with my left hand now, and I'm just gonna lift this rim up with my right while pinching. So I'm lifting and compressing with my right and centering the donut. So basically, I center once in the beginning, and I want to mainly just get all the lumps out. That's really where my centering comes back. That's the most important. So now, I'm gonna throw my donut. And I usually throw with that same sort of pinching technique for the first time until I get a more manageable wall. So I'm compressing with my right hand, and then basically squishing the clay like this and lifting straight up. And also, once again, I'm lifting straight up, so I'm gonna thin this clay out a lot as I lower down the wall. So I wanna make sure I leave it plenty thick, because it's gonna get thin when it goes down. I'm also very aware to leave a big rim, just like any other pot, but almost accentuated, because the rim also is going to get thinner as this thing folds out. So I've got a more manageable thickness. I'm about this thick down at the bottom of my pool, and I'm gonna start to pull out now. And this is where I'm starting to release pressure, because I'm guiding the clay out, but I'm not wanting to make it too thin. What is that thing?
That's a little camera.
Are you
I
filming
think
me?
that's interesting because you actually go to a cylinder, to a bowl, to a plate. You kind of go back to and forth. That's interesting.
It makes it more manageable to me to do that sort of centering thing in a more condensed form. And then I'm always kind of keeping pressure on this rim from that point forward. Because it's so easy for this thing to get away from you once it gets out, or just to have a fat part, which also does that same thing, and it's really frustrating to me. It does make it challenging to keep that continuous curve though, because you always want to push more with your interior hand and get a little divot in there, and that is also unacceptable to me.
You want a nice flow of the line on the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I trim all the way from the rim to the foot. So the exterior of this platter is not all that important to me at this point. Any ribbing I do out there is more just for pressure and compression. It's not about getting a flat bottom. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm giving a little compression and telling this thing to keep its form. Now I'm going to come from the inside and focus on my line. So my outside hand is really just a guide. I'm sensing pressure and give on this platter. And what I mean by that is I'm just kind of feeling it out to see if it's wanting to start to fall. So in a 2-day process, what I would do is go ahead and lay this down one more time so that it would be a little wider. And then, depending on the weather, I have a very open studio with a big, huge garage door. So if it's raining out, stuff doesn't dry, and if it's not, stuff will dry pretty quick. So I might be able to come back at the end of the day, and this rim will have actually lifted. And so I'll go back and push it back down.
Do you have to add water to that, or just?
Yeah, it gets like that little crust.
Yeah.
And so I just wet it down a little bit, and just push it back out with the rib, and keep a hand on the outside. And I always kind of compress the rim again just to feel how stiff it's gotten. Typically though, I'll throw them and leave them all out on my table and put a sheet over it, and come back the next morning, and the sheet just kind of helps them all dry evenly. Just a dry sheet. But for finishing purposes, I'm just going to kind of pick a curve that I think is acceptable and stop. That's about all I'm going to be able to do. So the second reason that I need this thing to have more tooth is because I decorate all my pots with a fairly thick porcelain slip. So I'm going to add, maybe a pound of wet clay to this thing. And it's very likely to collapse if it doesn't have a little bit of leathery to it.
Because then it will absorb the water and make it even wetter.
Exactly. And it kind of works both ways. It's a very fine line when you do this, because if it's too dry, it absorbs too much of the slip and cracks. So really, the wetter the better. This is my slip. So I gotta be really gentle on this rim, because even just like pushing on it right now could potentially make it collapse. And sometimes, if you're lucky, I'll finish it and then set it aside, and like in 20 minutes it'll just, yeah, slump. I've got one little bump in there, but I know that this platter is at its point where I can't mess with it right now. So if I let it stiffen up, I'd be able to get it out. But I won't have to look at this one again after today. So.
Oh, that looks so good. Are you nervous? Is that why you're shaking so bad?
I need a drink.
Beautiful. Oh, that is nice.